Hello you lovely lot, and welcome back to a brand new video here on my Stagey YouTube channel. If you are new here, my name is Flora and I make fun, if not slightly unhinged, theatrical content. But if you're not new here, you already knew that, so let's skip ahead. Today we'll be ranking all of the West End theatres, many of which I have been to and have strong feelings about. Although there are many on this list that I haven't been to yet I'm perfectly happy being judgmental about anyway. Now, this video was very much inspired by Ellie Talks Theatre's amazing video where she goes over all of the exteriors of West End theatres, discussing the marquees and things of the shows that are currently in these venues. So if you haven't already seen that video, I really recommend you go and check it out. Her video really made me realise how much my opinion on the theatres was really swayed by the show I had seen in those theatres, or the way the show that was currently in residence decided to style the outside of the theatre up. Hence what's led me to wanting to rank the theatres myself, but I've decided to do it in a slightly different way. I've chosen to rank them by both looking at the exterior of the theatre as well as the interior. I'm also just an incredibly judgmental person, if you couldn't guess already, so I thought this would be a fun, stagey way to get the judgment and opinion out of my system. So I'm going to be doing my best to rank them in alphabetical order, though I am dyslexic, so if stuff goes awry, let's just roll with it together. As I'm ranking them, I may or may not be sharing some of my favourite fun facts about these theatres too, so not only will this be an incredibly judgmental zone, but it'll also be one. Sorry, my cat wants to come join. Someone very special has just come to say hi in this video. One sec, I'm gonna put my mic down and introduce you all. Do you want to rank the theatres as well, Vader? You do? I'm sure he'll be sharing some of his very thoughtful opinions in just a moment. Okay, cat distractions aside, I feel like we should probably be getting into just how I'm going to be ranking these videos. So as you can see, this tier list of sorts goes from F to Q. A little bit random, I know, but let me explain. F is going to be Flora's favourites. These are what I honestly believe to be top tier theatres in the West End. Down from there is going to be A. It's going to be a really solid West End theatre, but there's just enough keeping it out of being an F tier theatre. Then we've got B, which is going to be a good solid theatre again, but not particularly fun, nothing particularly jazzy about it. The next tier down is C, which is going to be your bang average, nothing to write home about West End theatres, and below that we have D. These are bad theatres in my opinion at the very least. I don't like them, I don't love their aesthetics, there's something off about them for me personally. And then finally we have Q, and Q in this instance stands for queasy. These are theatres that I really dislike, and as petty as it sounds, are theatres that I have gone out of my way to avoid many times. So like I said earlier, my rankings will be taking into consideration not only the outside of the theatres, but the insides of the theatres, how well they go together, how comfortable the seats are the seats offset, basically everything about a theatre I can judge aside from the show on the stage, I will be judging. So let the fun begin. Starting us off on this tier list is going to be the Adelphi Theatre, because yes, we're doing this alphabetically like I said. Now this is one of the many theatres located on the Strand, and it's currently home to Back to the Future. Though the current rendition of the Adelphi that we know and love today isn't the first one, as there has been 4 theatres on this site, and it was previously known as the Samparelli Theatre. And the Adelphi Theatre that we know and love today is actually from the 1940s. Exterior wise, I think the Adelphi Theatre is really bland, right? If you take away all of the theming and the posters and the branding that shows put up, it is literally just like a blank building with like a window on it. I feel like I've created similar in The Sims in the past. I really do like the big window when I'm inside, right? But when I'm looking at the theatre from the outside, it just feels out of place. And like I said, if you take all the branding off, it's just like a plain slab of building. Interior wise though, I do think this theatre is a lot stronger. Even if you strip away all of the Back to the Future theming that ties it back to Hill Valley, I do really like the Art Deco interior of this theatre. I think it's gorgeous. I really like Art Deco as a general rule anyway, but I really like the way it's been done in this theatre specifically. Seating wise, I think the seats in the Adelphi are actually quite comfortable. They're also pretty decently offset, so you can kind of see between people's heads, which is something I really like to see in my theatre. Although up in the dress circle, some seats between them have like what I can only describe as like a plush table. It's like they didn't have enough room to fit extra seats in, so they're like, just put this divider in. It's a little bit odd, and as a general rule, I really like it, particularly if you're someone who doesn't like sitting next to a stranger. It's a nice little bit of distance to have between you. I don't like it though when someone lets their like 11-year-old child sit on it as like a form of booster seat, because then I really cannot see past your child. But that has only happened to me once, so I shouldn't gripe about it too much. Ranking wise, I'm definitely going to put this in A tier. I think if the outside was a little stronger, I could definitely bump it up into an F. I really do like the interior of this theatre, both with and without the Back to the Future theming. I think it's really pretty, but the outside is just too bland for me, unfortunately, compared to a lot of other theatres on this list. So we're going to keep going. Theatre 2 of 38, yes, I know we have a lot to get through, is going to be the Aldwych Theatre, which is currently home to Tina. It is definitely an Edwardian style theatre. It was built in 1905 and is currently a Grade 2 listed building that was most recently renovated in 2017, and the renovations only took them 14 days. Not 14 days. Oh my god, no. Could you imagine? 14 weeks. I'm so sorry. The renovations took 14 weeks. Now, this isn't a theatre I have ever seen a show in, but it is a theatre I walk past quite frequently, and I really do like the outside of it. I love the stained glass little marquee they have. I think the yellows in it really do work well with the Tina branding that is on the theatre at the moment. The way they light it up at night as well is really, really pretty, and I think the architecture is quite nice as well. I think the interior of this theatre is actually where it really shines. It's gorgeous. It has a colour palette of these soft greens, whites and golds, and I can very easily picture like Richard Wardians swanning about in this theatre discussing the latest piece of drama they're there to watch. It's one of those theatres that I feel really helps sell this idea of going to the theatre being like a special little treat, and I really appreciate that from it. So the Aldwych Theatre is also going to be ranked in at tier A along with the Adelphi Theatre. I think it is really, really pretty, and actually it's a theatre that I really love to like have a nose around and see inside, even if I'm not going to see a show there. I do like it when a theatre has a slightly different colour scheme than your standard reds, creams and golds, so it gets points for that as well. So yes, another solid A tier theatre. Next up is going to be the Ambassadors Theatre, which opened in 1913 with just 444 seats, which I kind of appreciate because that's like a nice solid number. It is one of the smaller venues on the West End, and it is where I saw Kathy and Stella, but I know it's currently, at least at the time of filming this, okay, it's currently home to The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Outside this theatre is kind of like a corner plot, if you get what I mean. So the branding and the big poster is kind of like on the corner of the theatre, and I kind of like that as it does give you a different perspective as opposed to just like a front on, which you often get with some of the theatres that are more built into the surrounding areas that they reside in. This is another theatre that lights itself up in fun colours depending on what show is in there. Architecturally, it's not one that's super jazzy to me. It doesn't like fill me with joy and bubbles and I'm like, oh my god, that's such a pretty building. It's just like, it's a good building. Like there's definitely worse buildings and we will get into those worse buildings, but it's also not like top tier for me. Inside of this theatre is quite nice. The bathrooms are tiny, bearing in mind like the queue for the women's bathrooms at any theatre is really long. I nearly took a little granny out when I opened the door. I still think about it because I nearly sent her flying. The toilets are an issue there, and I'm going to count that in the interior category. There's also another issue, and that is that there's mirrors in the stalls. Now, many theatres seem to have mirrors, I've found out through doing my research for this, but what's annoying about these mirrors is that they're kind of like, they're along the sides, so depending on like what row of the stalls you're sat in, you can see them at the corner of your eye, be that lights reflecting off them, or someone moving around you and things like that, and I just personally found it really, really distracting, and because of the mirrors alone, I'm docking this down to a tier B. The mirrors are just such an ick for me, and you'll see that repeated again as we find other theatres with mirrors in them later through this list. The Apollo Theatre is up next, and I feel like I'm talking incredibly quickly, guys, because we have 38 theatres to get through, and I don't have all day, and I take it you don't have all day either, so let's keep the whistle-stop tour going. Now, the Apollo Theatre opens its doors in 1901, and it's actually one of 6 theatres that reside on Shaftesbury Avenue. It's also one of 2 theatres on this list that have a well-known theatre collapsing story. In the case of the Apollo Theatre, the ceiling collapsed during a performance of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This ceiling issue has since been fixed, so you don't have to worry about the ceiling falling on you in this day and age. It's currently home to Fawlty Towers, but I saw magic goes wrong there. The exterior of this theatre is nice and symmetrical. It kind of looks a lot like a lot of other theatres in London. Like if you took all branding off of it and like put it in a lineup and asked me to point out which one it was, I'd be like, I don't know, it kind of all looks the same, right? I also don't love what they do with marquees at this theatre as a general rule. I think they're kind of bland in comparison to a lot of other theatres. It gives me sort of Renaissance style architecture. Don't quote me on that. I don't know my architectures very well, but that's the vibe it gives me, particularly like around the top of the theatre. Like it's nice, but I don't feel like it stands out particularly compared to a lot of other West End venues. But the inside, I do think, is where this theatre tends to shine. I really love the ceiling of the auditorium in here because unlike other theatres that have motifs of the Greek gods or cherubs or like very Sistine Chapel vibes, this one has a gorgeous painting painting of like a moonlit forest. And I just really, really love it. The deep blues and the blacks and the whites I think is really, really pretty and just quite different to what we see in other theatres. This is another theatre that does have mirrors in the stalls, but unlike the egregious hate crime that is the mirrors in the Ambassador Theatre, these mirrors are actually at the back of the stall, so behind everyone, so unable to distract you during a performance, so I will let those slide. I also just really like the way this theatre is decorated with the kind of motifs of Apollo and the muses scattered around, although I feel like the kind of like tealy scaly pattern they've got going on is a little bit confusing. A lot of the decor feels more oceany than it does like Apollo-y and theatre-y, and so ultimately I think all of that combined is what makes this another B-tier theatre for me. Moving from the Apollo to the Apollo Victoria next, and this is one of the biggest West End venues. I think, should we see if I can guess the number of seats correctly? I want to say 2,384 seats. Should we check my notes? With 2,384 seats, the Apollo Victoria is one of the largest in the West End. That's what I've got written down. So I got it right, guys. I feel like something that a lot of people don't know about the Apollo Victoria is that it actually used to be a cinema. It's not a cinema anymore, guys. Don't panic. But in the 1930s it was. It's only been a full-time theatre since the 1980s and is currently home to Wicked. I feel like it's very well known for homing Wicked. It's where I saw Wicked back when I was like a little child, so Wicked's been there a long time. Outside wise, this is a very Art Deco-y theatre. And bearing in mind, I know I told you I love Art Deco, I really don't like the outside of this theatre, particularly in the daytime. I really do enjoy it when they light it up green in the evenings. I think the contrast of the green with the silver on the outside looks really, really nice, but it just looks a little bland and kind of unassuming during the day, at least for me. The interior again, and it's kind of a common theme with a lot of these where I might not like the outside, but wow, the inside of the theatre is amazing, and the inside of this theatre is truly stunning. A Art Deco masterpiece. It kind of gives me stylized mermaid grotto, particularly with like the flowery bits up the side. They remind me, and this, bear with me with this reference, but they remind me of the Christmas tree worm. I'll put up a picture somewhere so you know what I'm talking about, but that's what they remind me of. I also really like the tendency of this theatre to light the space up pink, which I think really works well to offset the dark greens and golds of the space. This is a West End theatre that doesn't have red seats, which I really like. I do enjoy it when theatres choose a different colour for their seats just to be fun. They're dark green and kind of stripy, which I think is such a vibe. And I don't know if I love it so much just because Wicked's there and I feel like green is such an integral part of Wicked, but I think it does look really nice. And with all of that combined and taken into consideration, I think this is a theatre I'm definitely going to put in A. No. Do I want to put it in A? I really like the inside. I think I might actually bump this up to an F. Is the outside slightly less to my taste? Yes. But do I think it looks gorgeous at night? Also yes. Plus the interior is stunning. I love it, so I think I'm going to make this an F tier. Our last A theatre here is going to be the Arts Theatre, which actually has the honour of being the West End's smallest venue with only 350 seats. Given how small it is, it feels really harsh to judge it on the same scale as we're judging every other theatre, but we kind of have to. That's the name of the game here. Because of how small the theatre is, most of the building you see outside is not actually the theatre. I think they do really well with the space they have, and I do actually like the building that's built above it. I like the red window frames. I know that's, you know, not part of the theatre necessarily. They're probably like flats or something, but I think they're cute and I really like them, so I'm going to mention it anyway. I think what they do with the posters for this theatre as well is also really good, bearing in mind, like I said, they do have such limited space. I think the interior is where this really starts to struggle, as the foyer slash bar area isn't actually big enough to accommodate all of the people that the theatre itself can accommodate. So just before the doors open to let you into the auditorium, this space can become like a sardine can. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's cramped, you can't really move. God forbid you're a woman that needs to use the toilet because the queue is out the door sometimes. The theatre itself is bigger than all of the other kind of guest areas combined, and so it can make it quite unpleasant, particularly if you're someone that doesn't like crowds prior to going into the theatre. The seats here though at least are relatively comfortable. I do enjoy sitting in this theatre. I think because of how small it is, you do as a general rule have a good view from anywhere. There are some obstructed view seats though, and that's more to do with the construction of the theatre as opposed to anything else. And then our final thing under the interior category, and I don't know if this is necessarily fair to kind of dob on the theatre, but last time I went there was so many fruit flies. Like, we're trying to enjoy Choir of Man and it's like they're just hitting you in the face. It was really, really gross. And I do think it's a byproduct of the fact that Choir of Man uses quite liberal amounts of booze throughout the show. And if you've ever worked at a bar, you know fruit flies are the bane of every bar worker's existence. They're gross and they're hard to get rid of. And I think, unfortunately, you know, the jungle has become a little too real in many ways and become more bar-like than they perhaps intended with said fruit fly infestation. But I reckon in winter now you're probably all right. So I think all of that comes together for me to kind of quite confidently put this in C. I do think it is a great small venue, but if we are to sort of scale it and rank it equally alongside all of the other West End theatres in this video, I'm definitely happy considering it to be, you know, quite average. You know, it's not bad enough to be ranked any lower, but I also don't think it has enough merits going for it to rank it any higher, so I'm quite happy putting this in C tier. Did you know there's no West End theatres that begin with a B? I know, I didn't realise this until my research brought this to my attention, so we're going to move swiftly on to C and begin with the Cambridge Theatre. The Cambridge Theatre is one of 5 theatres that opened in the West End in the 1930s, or specifically I think the year 1930, actually. A lot of theatres opened that year, and the building I think was restored in like 1987, I want to say, and has been home to Matilda since 2011. Now, I do think this theatre is very uniquely placed in 7 Dials. It's kind of like a giant triangle with the whole building sort of feeling like an optical illusion. You sort of look at it and go, no way you can fit a big theatre in there, but they can. And so for that, I think it's quite fun. This theatre, for some reason, just really gives me bank vibes just looking at it from the outside. I think if you took away all of the Matilda branding, it would definitely look like a bank. Like, it does get points for being a triangle. That is snazzy, but I just take issue with theatres looking like banks. I don't know why. It's a common theme throughout the video. As I was like doing my research for it, I was like, it looks like a bank. I don't like it. So if you hear that a lot, I apologize, but there you are. I have to say, right, moving inside this theatre, I think this is one of the most hideous theatre auditoriums on this list. Blue? Like, I get when you go into the theatre, it's dim, there's mood lighting, but oh my god, some of these auditoriums should not be seen like in full daylight. I think this is hideous. I'm not even gonna mince my words. I know this sounds really harsh, but I really don't like it. And so this is gonna become our first Q theatre, okay? No, I don't think. I know this theatre makes me feel queasy just looking at it. I really don't like it. The aesthetic is just not for me. You might love it, but I don't, and this is my tier list, so I'm putting it in Q. The Criterion Theatre is up next, and I do think for me this definitely sits on the opposite end of the spectrum from the Cambridge Theatre. Originally opening as a concert hall in 1873, this theatre has been here for a long time. Renovations have been ongoing since 2017, and I learned this in doing research for this video, that actually a small proportion of every ticket for every show sold here actually goes to the ongoing restoration projects happening throughout the theatre, because unlike many West End venues, this is actually still independently owned, and I love that. Outside wise, there's not much to talk about. This theatre is nestled in the heart of the hustle and bustle of Piccadilly Circus. I nearly said Piccadilly Theatre. That's someone we'll be discussing later. No, we're in the heart of Piccadilly Circus for this one, and actually it is only the ticket box and tiny foyer that is at ground level here. The rest of this theatre is all underground, and so kind of like the Cambridge, it feels like an optical illusion that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger the further down you go. I do really like the marquee on this theatre. I think it is really pretty, and a lot of the shows that have been in there have done some really cool stuff with it. I really love the Two Strangers Carry a Cake branding across the front of it. I think at the time of filming this, I want to say Amaze is in there. I do quite like the marquee for that show as well. I think it lends itself to creativity, certainly. Moving inside the theatre, I think the interior is where this theatre really shines and where I really have my love for it. It is gorgeous. Almost the entire interior of the bars and things like that is beautifully tiled. I believe, if I remember from my notes, that it's all hand painted tile as well, which is partly why the restoration projects are ongoing. There is beautiful brass work here and there, loads of stained glass lights as well, which really adds to this sort of almost museum-like aesthetic. I think the auditorium itself, relative to the rest of the Criterion Theatre, is a lot more scaled back. It is a lot simpler. I don't hate it. It's not simple to the point of feeling bland. It is still beautifully decorated. I just think relative to the rest of the theatre, it's not underwhelming. I think just a surprise how simple the actual auditorium itself is. This theatre also has pink seats. Can we get a little cheer for the pink seats? I love these pink seats. I think they're quite comfortable. They're a treat to sit in. The Criterion is one of those theatres that, due to the age of it and due to how it was constructed back in the day, there are pillars, they're support pillars for the dress circle, which do give some people an obstructed view, but I've never sat that far back in this theatre. I have been in the front 2 rows every time I've seen a show here, so I can't really comment on that, but I like the pink seats. I think they're fun. I think they're quite comfy. And so if you couldn't guess by me gushing about the Criterion Theatre, this is definitely going to be another F tier for me. I think I'm going to actually rank the Criterion higher than the Apollo Victoria. I just prefer it. I really love this theatre, if you couldn't tell. The Dominion Theatre is up next, which is currently home to The Devil Wears Prada. This is another theatre where the outside looks like a bank to me, a bank with big LED signs on it. I don't like LED signs when it comes to theatres, not least because I think they're really difficult to take pictures of. I completely understand them from like a theatre perspective in terms of it's a lot easier to change out what's on the poster. So if you've say got like a special event going on, you can change it quite easily. I just don't like them because I don't like taking pictures of them, which is so petty, but also it's my job to take pictures of them. So I want them to look nice. So it's a big no from me, just from the outside alone. And then you go inside, and aside from being hit by a massive wave of deja vu when I last went into this theatre, because I'd just recently seen See How They Run, which had its opening scenes filmed there, it just continues to feel like a bank. Like, particularly with the 2 staircases up the side and like the kind of archway you can walk under, but people can also like stand up there and look down on you. It just feels like a bank. And then you go into the auditorium and it's just red. There's so little contrast in here. It kind of makes your eyes feel funny, at least to me. The seats also aren't super offset, so you will unfortunately spend a lot of the show looking at the back of someone's head if they are taller than you, which is not what you've paid £90 for realistically. So this is another theatre going in queue. I don't like the Dominion. I don't really know what else there is to say about that. I just don't like it. So we're going to move swiftly along to the Duchess Theatre, which is next. And the Duchess Theatre is actually kind of what inspired this video, because I think seeing what Ellie had to say in her video about the Duchess Theatre made me realise that actually I didn't like the Duchess Theatre as much as I thought I did. I just really liked the show that was in the Duchess Theatre, which is The Play That Goes Wrong by Mischief Theatre, if you didn't know, which has just celebrated its 10th birthday. Outside wise, I really do like the Duchess Theatre sign that's like blue and gold. Now this actually used to be white and gold, but I cannot find information on when or why it was changed. I do really like the blue. I think it looks really gorgeous. It's really eye-catching. Just unfortunately, it's like tucked away under the rest of the marquee. The Goes Wrong branding all over the theatre looks fantastic, but if you strip that away, it just leaves behind architecture that personally isn't really to my taste. Although if you want another video on the interesting construction of this theatre, I'd definitely be willing to do that because I think it's fascinating. Interior wise, I'm kind of split because I really like the seats in this theatre. I do genuinely think you have a good view from both up in the dress circle and down in the stalls, but also the interior of this theatre just kind of gives sad beige mum's attempt at Art Deco. I know that again is a really like weird way to describe it, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about it. It's quite bland on the inside, really, which I guess kind of reflects the outside as well. It's just underwhelming, to say the least. But what I do find fascinating is the fact that, unlike some of the other theatres we've mentioned previously, this one is sort of relatively younger. I think this one is only 95 years old, this theatre, relative to like 150 for the Criterion. And so as a result, with sort of the advancement in the time period this theatre was built, it also means that the dress circle here is actually suspended from the ceiling, and so therefore not supported by pillars on the stalls level, so there aren't any obstructed eye lines in the stalls, which is really nice, and I thought I would share with you. But that rambling aside, I think I have to put this one in C. I mean, I don't know why I'm saying have. No one's making me do this. I want to put this one in C. Because as much as I love the show in The Duchess, I don't think The Duchess is a theatre I love. The Duke of York Theatre is up next. It was once known as the Trafalgar Square Theatre, but was renamed in 1895 after George V, and it is currently home, at the time of filming, to Barcelona. The outside of this theatre is one I definitely walk past a lot. It's kind of on my way from other West End theatres to the train station, so I do see it a lot. It's nice and symmetrical. It gives me Georgian architecture vibes, even though I've got nothing to base that off of other than my own assumptions, and I think it's pretty. I just don't think it sort of wows me. It doesn't stand out particularly. The inside of this theatre, the auditorium, feels very classic West End with the reds and golds, but weirdly they've paired those reds and golds with grey walls, and I don't know why. I really don't like the grey. It's quite depressing. And it's also a theatre that has a really sort of quite curved dress circle, which is a problem I have with quite a few theatres, simply just due to how much it can skew your perception of the stage based on where you're sat. And so I'm going to put this one in C as well. Moving on to the Fortune Theatre next. The Fortune Theatre was actually the first theatre built post World War I, opening in 1924. World War II saw this become the venue for the ENSA, who, I'm not a World War II expert, who I think were kind of like the entertainers of the armed forces to like keep morale up. And so quite aptly now it is home to Operation Mincemeat, a World War II comedy musical. The outside of this theatre to me feels really, really bare, and bear with me, it also kind of gives me Italian vibes. Like there's not much going on here, and again, it's one that if you took away, kind of like the Adelphi, if you took away all of the show branding on the theatre, what are you left with? Like just sort of like a blank surface. And so I think architecturally it could be more interesting. And the interior of this theatre, I really don't like it. There's a bar in the stalls. It's a bit weird. The seating's a little bit all over the place. It's just kind of a little bit odd. I think the 1940s vibes of the building work really well for the show that's there currently as well. I don't think that's enough of a saving grace to stop me putting this solidly in C. Moving on, we're going to discuss the Garrick Theatre, which is named after esteemed British actor David Garrick and was opened back in 1889. During the construction of this theatre, they actually found an underground river that had been forgotten about since the Roman times, and in modern day, it is the Northern Line that rumbles underneath this theatre. It has been renovated since 2015 and is currently home to Why Am I So Single? Outside-wise, I do think this is definitely one of my least favourite theatres, and I can say that quite confidently. Partly because of how difficult it is to photograph, but also because of like where the branding is. Shows tend to just like slap up a poster and call it a day. The building itself also, this is like really nitpicky and possibly too harsh, but just looks like it needs a good power wash. Like it looks like it's been covered in London smog for too long. And also the updated windows on the theatre just look a little bit mismatched with the architecture as well. There's a bit of a disconnect there for me. And then moving to the inside of the theatre, this is about to sound like a really odd thing to say, but I think the entire Garrick Theatre smells like wet dog. I don't know if it's left over from the kind of construction work and the renovations it had done, but it smells damp in there to the point that my Why Am I So Single program is like in quarantine because it smells musty, dusty and gross and I don't like it. It's also one of those theatres that doesn't really have a lot of like guest space outside of like going and sitting in your seat. So as the venue fills up, if people aren't going to their seats, it can become quite like sardine-like, and that's something I don't really like. And because of that, plus the wet dog smell, I'm gonna have to put this one in Q. I really don't love the Garrick, despite having seen a number of shows there. It's also quite disconcerting to be like in the middle of like a romantic ballad or something and just have the Northern Line rumble underneath you. So this is going in Q. Little Miss Gielgud Theatre is up next, which was first opened as the Hicks Theatre in like 1906, I want to say. It was also at one point named the Globe, but why would you call a theatre the Globe in London when the literal Globe Theatre, like Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, is there? So quite quickly they renamed it to avoid confusion. At the time of filming, this theatre is currently home to Juno and the Paycock. Outside wise, I feel like this is architecture we've seen in quite a lot of theatres around the West End. I know it's popular for a reason, but it just feels a bit samey after a while. Also, in doing my research for this, I saw the designs that the architect wanted to build for this theatre, and I'm so sad that never came to be. The building we have now just is like a sad little sort of wannabe of the architectural designs that were put forward. I wish we still had some of the carvings and stonework that the original design had. I think that would have really helped elevate the exterior of this theatre. I do think it's a little bit unfair for me to be like, I'm giving it a low score because I like the drawing of the theatre better than I like the actual theatre, but hey, it's my tier list. I'm gonna do it how I want to do it. And then inside, weirdly enough, I feel like if you asked me to draw the inside of the theatre, I would probably end up drawing the inside of this theatre. It's very classic with the reds and the golds and the cream walls with a lot of kind of Greekish embellishment here and there. So I think whilst, you know, I had a little rant about the fact that I think the design of the theatre looked better than the theatre we actually ended up with, I think I'm going to put this in B tier. Miss Gillian Lynn is up next, the only West End theatre currently named after a woman. This was once upon a time opened as the New London Theatre, but it was renamed in 2018 to commemorate the amazing choreographer Gillian Lynn. Now, the exterior of this building to me is really boring. It kind of looks like corporate offices. It's just a bit bare and a bit bland. This is technically brutalist architecture, but the outside is just so meh to me. Like, I feel like we could have done better. Inside, though, is a different story. The inside is still brutalist architecture, but I feel like it just looks so much better. I don't know if it's like the kind of remnants of the 1970s vibes that I'm liking, because weirdly, I quite like 1970s like interior design, but I like the inside of this theatre. I also think it deserves a bonus point for the fact that it's got escalators. I feel like there's no other West End theatre that can say that. I mean, the theatre is a little bit confusing to navigate. I think, you know, I'd be remiss to leave out the fact that this is an incredibly adaptable theatre as well. The technology incorporated into the walls, into the moving stage. Like, oh yeah, spoilers, the Gillian Lynn stage is actually like a giant revolve, if you didn't know that. Like a portion of the seating and the stage can just like, woo! And so I do think, you know, whilst it's not used in every show, it's something also worth pointing out. Also, shout out to the Gillian Lynn theatre seats for being so comfy. I almost had a nap in it, and that's not because the show was boring, that's because I was super comfy, and I feel like you can't say that about a lot of theatres. So all in all, I think this is quite a confident A from me. I really, really like this theatre. If the outside was a little more jazzy, I definitely could have bumped this up to an F, but I think the outside just really lets it down at the moment, so it's gonna remain in A for now. Okay, hello again. As you can see, it's a completely different day. All my footage from the Harold Pinter Theatre through to the Wyndham's Theatre has been lost, so we're going to refilm it, lucky me. So yeah, that's why it's a different day, a different outfit, and a different hairstyle, but I think it is time we get back into ranking the theatres. And like I said, we're gonna get right back into this by talking about the Harold Pinter Theatre. Now, this theatre was first opened in 1881 as the Comedy Theatre, but was renamed in 2011 to acknowledge the works of Harold Pinter. It only took them 6 months to build this theatre, which I think is pretty impressive, and it is currently home to Macbeth. Outside wise, this is another very temple looking theatre, especially with that statue of Euterpe on the front. She was the Greek muse of lyrical poetry, and I know it's her because she's got the aulos, which is kind of that like two-pronged flute you see her holding. There is a lot more ancient history architecture knowledge coming in the rest of this video, so stay tuned if you got a little bit excited by that. I like it, don't get me wrong, but I feel like relative to a lot of the other theatres we're about to see, especially ones that do give off similar temple vibes, I think it is a little bit bland. I think the way they add the marketing to the outside, the show branding and stuff, is a little too understated for my liking. I'd just like to see it pop a little bit more. The inside of this theatre though is really, really pretty in my opinion. It's really pleasing. I love looking at it. The shades of blue they put on the walls are really something pretty, particularly when we've seen how blue can be an abomination, such as with the Cambridge Theatre. I also think the blue really complements the gold throughout the space as well. I really, really do like the inside of this theatre. So I think I'm going to put this in tier B. The inside is really, really strong, and whilst I do like the outside, I think it just needs a little more razzle dazzle, a bit more pizzazz to really pop it up into that A or even F tier. Carrying on, next we're going to rank His Majesty's Theatre. Now, there's actually been a theatre on this site since like the 1700s. His Majesty's Theatre specifically opened its doors in 1897, making it the 4th theatre to have stood at this location. It was actually designed to look very reminiscent of the theatres that had stood here previously, and it is currently home to Phantom of the Opera, which has been on a continuous run here since 1986. Outside wise, I think this theatre is really, really impressive. It's really gorgeous to look at, particularly when you compare it to the rather bland modern buildings that seem to surround it. It's really grand and really ornate, and I think it works really well to actually complement Phantom of the Opera. The branding here is a little on the understated side when it comes to big posters and things, but actually I feel like Phantom's been there so long that that doesn't really matter. Inside wise, I think the inside of this theatre pairs really well with the outside. With other theatres, I feel like we've seen a bit of a disconnect between the auditorium and the exterior of the theatre, but that's not the case here. They match really well, the inside and the outside, and again, just like the outside, I feel like this just breathes Phantom of the Opera vibes to me. It's really, really pretty, and so because of all of that, I'm going to rank this in A tier. Carrying on, the London Coliseum is next. Now, I know it is very debated as to whether the London Coliseum is actually a West End theatre or not. Official London Theatre has it listed as a West End theatre, and because of its size, I'm going to include it on this list as well, although I do know some people probably wouldn't count it. Exterior wise, like I know up until now I've been going, this theatre looks like a bank. This one doesn't look like a bank, it looks like a train station. And now I don't know if that's because it looks like King's Cross and St Pancras, like that kind of very reddish stone. I want to say it's sandstone. Okay, it's not made of sandstone, but I was close. It's actually terracotta facing, which is what gives it that like red colour. But London's King's Cross is made of red sandstone, so I guess that's where my confusion came in. But just to clarify, the London Coliseum is made of terracotta facings. But to me, the buildings give off very similar vibes, which is probably just because of the colour of the materials used more than any like actual architectural significant reason. But I just thought I'd put that out there. This looks more like a train station than a theatre to me. And inside, the inside's really meh. Like it's supposed to be this like big grand space, and I'm just not feeling that from like the interior design. So I'm gonna put this in D tier. I think this is really underwhelming. There is smaller theatres doing more with their space, shall we say. So yeah, D tier for this one. The next theatre we're going to rank is going to be the London Palladium. The exterior here is another one that's giving me bank, very much like the bank from Mary Poppins, but if they made it a theatre, if that makes sense. It also has LED screens at the front, which as we've discussed, I am not a massive fan of, but I do think I should point out the fact that I do really like the engaged columns that this theatre has. It's basically those columns that look like they're stuck in the walls. These are Corinthian columns. Corinthian columns are the columns we see the most of on West End theatres, and you're probably going to get sick of me talking about columns, but I like columns and I'm going to keep talking about them. So I think up until now, this is maybe our first mention of Corinthian columns, but they will come up again quite frequently with the theatres still left to discuss on this list. And I really do like the way they look on this theatre, particularly because the top of them, or like the florally bit, which is what makes it a Corinthian column, actually is like a different colour than the white of the building, which creates some nice contrast when you're looking at it. Inside wise, I definitely have mixed feelings about this theatre, not only in the auditorium, but just in the guest spaces as well. There are parts that feel really nice, particularly some of the bar areas, but there's other parts that just feel a little bit cheap. And I know that's a really odd thing to say, but I think it comes down to the fact that all of the marble you see is fake. It's actually plasticky tiles stuck to the wall, but it's like this cheap fake wallpaper marble. Compared to like the opulence of the outside and everything, I just think we could maybe like step it up. It just cheapens the overall effect of this theatre. Also, I don't know if anyone else has been backstage at this theatre. I have, and the hallway that a lot of the dressing rooms are on is hilarious to me because it just looks like it belongs in like a primary school somewhere, even down to the colour of the carpet, which really does contrast with the rest of the theatre. It's also called the Donkey Run, which I think's fun. But I think whilst I don't love the inside of this theatre, and I did say the outside is giving me bank vibes like a lot of theatres in London apparently do, I'm definitely going to put this in C tier. I think the columns save it a little bit. I do love a column, as you've probably learnt. And I think overall it's a very solid average London theatre. Carrying on, and column chat, yes, I'm afraid is going to continue. We are going to the Lyceum Theatre. Now, this hasn't always been a theatre. The Lyceum was at one point actually a ballroom, which I think is pretty interesting, but it is now currently home to the Lion King. Outside wise, this is another great example of a London theatre looking like a temple. I just feel like this theatre looks really classy and really elegant, and it's just quite nice to look at. If you stand far enough back, it does look like three buildings have been mushed together, but I kind of appreciate that about this theatre. I also really like the way the Lion King branding has been incorporated into the space. It's not too over the top and actually just works really well with the space the theatre offers them. So whilst I know I said I wasn't judging any of these theatres based on the shows that are inside them, I do think to some extent the way the show utilises the space the theatre has to offer is something that I can comment on because it does overall influence the impact of the theatre itself. Inside wise though, I don't really love this theatre. I am not a dark wood person, and this is that really, really dark wood that just always reminds me of like a rental property in Kissimmee, Florida. I know that's like such a niche reference to make, but every rental property in Florida has like really dark wood cabinets, and so that's all I can think of when I see the dark wood of this theatre. I believe the seats in this theatre are supposed to be orange, but in every picture I looked at, they just kind of looked really faded and really dirty, as if they were once red and needed a bit of a clean to make them red again. Which, whilst I know these seats aren't as gross as they look, it's still a little bit like, I just wonder if they'd been red or a different colour, whether they wouldn't feel this way, at least in my mind. I do also really want to point out that I like the gold carvings in and around this theatre. I like the gold decor they've added. I just can't unsee how dark the wood is. I think the gold offsets the wood slightly. I would also point out that I think because The Lion King is such a earthy coloured show that it actually really works in this venue. I just wonder whether if a slightly brighter musical was to take up residency here, whether the dark wood would feel different, if that makes sense. But to rank this, I'm going to put this in F tier. I know I moaned about the colour of the interior, but ultimately I still think it is a really nice interior, and as I said, I really do love the outside of this theatre. I really think it's pretty and I really like looking at it, and so yeah, it's going to go in F tier. Carrying on, we are going to talk about the Lyric Theatre next. Now, I don't know if you guys know this. I don't know if you've followed me on any of my other social platforms, which if you haven't, go and do that, but I talk quite a lot about how I don't like the Lyric Theatre. I've avoided going to see shows because they're at the Lyric Theatre, which also weirdly, like, it's my least favourite West End theatre, but also I think the theatre I've been to the most for some reason. But yeah, I think that should hopefully prepare you for what I'm about to say about this theatre. I will point out that the Lyric is the oldest of all 6 theatres located on Shaftesbury Avenue, and it is currently home to Hadestown. But outside wise, this place doesn't look like a theatre to me. It looks more like a London townhouse. I don't feel like it stands out a whole bunch compared to the buildings around it, but as well as other theatres that we've looked at throughout this video. Inside, I do think it is worth pointing out that I really, really dislike the dress circle of this theatre. I feel like it is too much of an exaggerated curve, and as such, unless you are sat bang centre, your view of the stage is skewed, and as such, the set looks wonky. The legroom isn't great either, and I'm not even that tall, so that's a little bit of a frustration. I have sat both in the dress circle and the stools, and I will say in the stools, I dislike this theatre less, but I think that's largely to do with the fact that there is no curve in the stools and you can just look straight ahead. Decor-wise, this is again your kind of standards, reds, creams, and golds. It looks pretty, but as a general rule, this is quite basic for a West End Theatre, and I think we've definitely seen better interiors on this tier list, at least honestly in my opinion. So my little rant at the start of talking about the Lyric Theatre is probably not going to surprise anyone, but I definitely have to put this in queue. This is not a theatre I enjoy going to. It's uncomfy. I don't think it's like that wow inside or out, so yeah, a very confident queue from me. Our next theatre is going to be the Noel Coward Theatre, which was once called the New Theatre and then has been renamed twice since. From 1973 to 2004 it was called the Albury, but now it's named after English playwright Noel Coward. The show currently at this theatre at the time of filming is Dr. Strangelove. Outside wise, I do quite like this theatre. It does have those kind of Greek elements that I've been picking out of other theatres and telling you I really like. It is a little bit too blocky for me in my opinion. I feel like you could recreate this theatre quite well in like Minecraft, particularly those like segmented square columns on the front, but it also could be much worse. This is also a theatre that likes to light itself up, and I do think it looks really good when it's lit up all blue like we frequently see. Inside wise, this is another quite bland theatre for me. It's simple and understated, which is fine. Like, it's not egregiously bad, it's just not sparking joy at the same time. So I'm going to rank the Noel Coward Theatre in tier C. Moving on to the Novello Theatre. This is another theatre that is a corner plot, much like the Aldwych is. It does at times look like someone needs to take a pressure washer to it. It can get a little bit grey, where I think the stone is originally supposed to be a light grey or white colour, but it is a solid theatre design for London. It's another theatre that lights up blue because obviously Mamma Mia is there at the minute, and I think it looks really gorgeous at night. Moving inside though, that's what I really want to talk about with this theatre. It looks really similar to the Lyric and the Noel Coward with regards to it having the same colour scheme. It just has like more room to decorate, I guess, and so as a result it does look slightly more grand. And so I think for that reason it does feel a little bit boring. You see it a lot in London theatres, this kind of decor style, though I will say what sets it apart from other theatres that stick with this very traditional red, gold and cream colour scheme is definitely going to be the circular mural on the kind of rotunda at the top, which depicts the sky and like a handful of different gods, but I couldn't work out from any of the pictures who they were. And then you also have a gorgeous sort of relief at the top of the proscenium arch, and this one is either, and I'm going to place two bets here, Helios or Apollo. Obviously they did a lot of swapping jobs in the ancient Greek times, so I can't really work out who it's supposed to be, but there's a chariot, there's horses, it's gold, it's sunny, it's really pretty, and I think does set it apart from other theatres that have a very similar interior design, so it does get a bonus point for that. And as a result, I think I'm going to rank this in B tier. I think it is slightly more elevated than say something like the Noel Coward or Lyric that has a very similar design to it, but it has those elements that just elevate it a little bit more. Up next is the Palace Theatre, which is currently home to a production of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Now, I know I've said that I don't love theatres that are like red brick on the outside, but I think the Palace Theatre has to be the exception, right? This theatre, honestly, to me, looks fabulous. The brickwork, oh, it's all just so pretty. It's very large and in charge with the plot of land it sits on in London, and I think you can't help but have your eyes drawn to it. Inside-wise is just as impressive as the outside. Kind of like His Majesty's Theatre, the inside and the outside really feel connected to one another. There are elements that very much give like rich private school vibes. I think that's because of the stone and marble used in the interior. Like, I can definitely see why this was chosen for a Harry Potter production. I would point out that like other theatres, it has mirrors in the stalls, which, ew, we know I don't like that. Genuinely, if someone could explain to me why theatres keep doing this, I would love to know, because this is not the only theatre that has mirrors at the sides of the auditorium for some reason. But little mirror rant aside, I think it's opulent inside, and it definitely works with both the exterior as well as the show that is in this venue. I'm going to rank this in A tier. I did want to put it in D just because of the mirrors, but then I realised that was like harsh and petty. So we're actually going to pay it its dues and put it where it belongs in A tier. I just think it's such a shame that this is a theatre that, until the show in it changes, I'm not really going to be able to appreciate the inside and outside of to its full extent, because I refuse to give money to a show that was written by a known TERF. So sorry, JK Rowling, you're not getting my money today. Moving on, before I get too political, we have the Phoenix Theatre up next. This is another theatre that has a show in it based off of a much loved property, and that's going to be Stranger Things: The First Shadow. Outside wise, I really like this theatre. I think it's fun. I like the way the white bit really contrasts with the brick on either side. I like the curly whirly columns too. These again are Corinthian columns. This is a running theme amongst the columns of West End theatres, but I thought I would still point out to you that they are Corinthian columns. I do think the pop of white makes this more visually interesting than some other theatres. colours. Interior wise, they really said red and gold, okay? I feel like it just needed to be toned down a little bit, perhaps incorporating that cream that we see a lot of other theatres bring into this colour palette just to make it a little less in your face. The red and gold alone are quite a lot and it is quite hard to look at least for me. And so because of all of that combined, I'm going to put this in B tier. Carrying on, next up, we're going to rank the Piccadilly Theatre. This theatre had to be entirely rebuilt in the 1940s after it was destroyed in World War II, and currently it is home to Moulin Rouge. Talking about the exterior of this theatre first, I do think it looks lovely, that has to be said, particularly when they light it up at night. But it also looks really great in the daytime, which I feel like some theatres don't do very well. It's nestled between a lot of other much larger, bigger, brighter buildings, but I think it really holds its own where it is. And I must say, the way they have decked it out for Moulin Rouge is something to behold. Interior-wise, this is another one that is very much dominated by red. Now, this is a direct byproduct of it being home to Moulin Rouge, which has a lot of red incorporated into all of its themes. I do think the red also works here in ways it maybe hasn't in other theatres because you have those golds and creams to really balance it out. And also, whilst they're not permanent features, of course we have to mention the elephant and the windmill, which make this place look even more fantastic and spectacular on the inside. In doing my research for this video though, I also found out that the interior of this theatre wasn't always red. It was actually redone for Moulin Rouge. It used to be green, not the same cute green that we had I think back at the Aldwych Theatre. This is a bit more sludgy, and so I'm glad that's gone. And so I think it's only fair that we put this in A tier. I just don't think I'm ready to put this in F tier just because it is difficult to work out how much of the interior is Moulin Rouge based and how much of it is actually the theatre itself, so I'm going to put it in A for now. Carrying on, we now have the Playhouse Theatre, which is actually a reconstruction of the Royal Avenue Theatre and is currently home to Cabaret. Outside wise, this isn't my favourite. I just feel like it's not very interesting. It's quite understated and it feels a bit like meh, but I do also think it could definitely be worse. The interior of this theatre is also really interesting to me because unlike other theatres that are decorated with like carvings, this one's decorated with what I can only describe as paintings that look like frescoes you might find on the walls of a Roman house. The ceiling is painted as well, which is always nice, and it's just such a different vibe to other theatres that we see. So I'm going to put this in B tier. Moving on to the Prince Edward's Theatre. I found out during my research that this theatre actually used to be a casino in like the 1930s, but it was renovated in like the 1950s and is now home to MJ the Musical. This is a theatre that's exterior is dominated by bricks, and I think as a result of that, I really don't like it. It's just kind of a square. Or not a square, but very blocky, and I think it's not very visually interesting to look at. It's kind of like a box with windows. It also has an electronic sign on the outside, which I think we've all discovered by now I don't like. I just think we've seen way more exciting architecture and exteriors up until now. The inside, again, this is another theatre that just went with red. Maybe it was because I was hungover last time I was at this theatre, I will admit, but this entire space just gave me a headache. There is 2 shades of red on the wall. There's another shade of red for the seating, and then the carpet and curtains are different shades of red as well. It's just a lot of red, and there's not enough that like offsets it or balances it out for me. So I think I'm gonna have to put this in C tier. The Prince of Wales is up next, and it is currently where Book of Mormon is. The exterior of this theatre is very, very tall. Now, I didn't do any research into whether it is the tallest West End theatre, but it definitely looks it. It kind of reminds me of a water tower you might see in like the middle of Kentucky somewhere, with that bit on the top where the Prince of Wales branding is. Like, I don't have any negative feelings towards it, but it's also not a theatre that's exterior makes me like jump with joy. Inside, this is another theatre that is rocking those rusty orange seats, but unlike the Lyceum, I feel like it has a completely different vibe here just because of the other colours that are incorporated into this space. There is a lot of wood in here as well, but it's not that really, really dark wood. And actually, it all just kind of reminds me of like a cruise ship theatre, and I think it's to do with all of the gold accents and the way they've been styled. So I think with all of this being taken into consideration, I kind of want to put this in B tier. No, I think I might put this in C tier. I'm not sure I want to make it a B. We are now onto the Savoy Theatre. Did you know that the Savoy Theatre was the first ever theatre to be fully powered by electricity? And that throughout its history it has been renovated twice, which is why when you go through the main entrance today, it kind of feels like you're entering through something that's not the main entrance. Exterior wise, I find it really hard to define what the exterior is, okay? Because where you see the kind of glitzy glammy marquee is not actually the Savoy Theatre. It's the Savoy Apartments, I believe, which whilst yes, still bears the Savoy name, isn't part of the theatre. It's a separate building. So I feel like it doesn't count, although it does look very nice. The theatre itself, by contrast, is really nestled into the sort of right hand side of the main entrance of the Savoy Hotel. It's really small, it's really cramped, and I just don't love it. The interior of this theatre, I think, is hideous. Whose idea was it to paint the walls yellow and then decorate it with bright green, I want to say bunches of grapes, but they could also be bubbles. But it's hideous. I think it looks atrocious. And then you get into the auditorium itself. The auditorium's like nice, okay? I don't hate it, but whose idea was the multicolored seats? Okay, they're comfy seats, but I don't like that they're all different colors. That just upsets me. And so all of that combined, I think, I don't know, because the seats are really, really comfy. So is that enough for me to not put it in D tier? No, I'm going to put the Savoy Theatre in D tier. I think it seems only fair. Editing Flora here, hence why my background is a mess. It's just occurring to me that I managed to skip over the entirety of the Shaftesbury Theatre. Not sure how that happened. I do really like this theatre inside and out, and I'm going to put it in A tier. Carrying on, we have the Sondheim up next. This theatre was previously known as the Queen's Theatre, but was renamed in 2019 to honour Stephen Sondheim. Once upon a time, this theatre was actually twinned with the Gielgud Theatre, but renovations have resulted in this theatre looking completely different, and it is currently where you can find Les Mis. To start by talking about the exterior, I think it's worth pointing out that I think it is a shame this exterior no longer looks like the Gielgud Theatre, and I think it's a little bit of a loss compared to what we have today. The Sondheim Theatre to me just feels really out of place with a lot of other West End theatres because it's just kind of like bricks that have been painted black with Les Mis branding slapped on the front of it. I feel like if you took all of these like posters and flashing lights away, it would just look like a really depressing office block. And it's made more depressing by the fact that we know what it used to look like because we can go and see the Gielgud Theatre and be like, oh, okay, this is what it originally looked like. But I will say the inside of this theatre is very nice. I really like how ornate the ceiling is. Its combination of red, white and gold is really, really nice as well. Has this interior colour scheme been used in the West End before? Absolutely. But do I think the Sondheim has maybe done it better than other theatres we've covered so far? Also yes. The seats were pretty comfy from what I can remember, and they're also decently offset, so you have a pretty good view even if someone tall sits in front of you, which is always nice. But I'm going to rank this as a C because I think I ranked the Gielgud B from what I can remember yesterday, and I feel like the exterior of this theatre just really, really lets it down no matter how nice the interior is. Carrying on, our next theatre is the St Martin's Theatre, which was actually built in partnership with the Ambassadors Theatre that we covered ages ago and is currently home to the Mousetrap. Outside wise, I really quite like this theatre. I think it looks really, really great with the Mousetrap branding all over it. That big neon sign is really, really nice. It also has that stained glass marquee, which we know I also really enjoy seeing on a theatre, though I do think this is another theatre that if you removed all branding, you could also mistake for like an old bank. But like I said, I do think this kind of architecture is offset by the branding that they now have on the front of it for the Mousetrap. Moving inside, I'm really not a fan of the polka dot walls of this theatre. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but it's so distracting. It's also another theatre that gives us dark wood interiors with the wood carvings just looking like a banister my grandparents used to have in their old house. I do like the ceiling here. It's got a snazzy chandelier, but I don't think that's enough to offset the way the rest of the interior looks. So I'm going to rank this in D. Carrying on, we now have the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. There has actually been a playhouse on the site of the Drury Lane since 1663, so before the Great Fire of London, but the theatre that stands there today was first opened in 1812. As of right now, Frozen has shut there, and we are currently waiting on the arrival of Hercules in summer 2025, and that's something I'm really looking forward to. But until then, let's talk about the theatre. I feel like when looking at the exterior of this theatre, pictures don't really do justice how big it is. Like, for context, the Fortune Theatre, which is literally across the road, that entire theatre, building and all, fits on the stage of the Drury Lane. This venue is massive. But I think there's a little bit of a disconnect architecturally. Like, I think the front of this theatre is really quite bland, particularly then when you go and look at what's inside. It's giving a sort of, we tried to build the White House on a budget. I think it's the kind of really blocky columns and stuff like that. It's quite a blank canvas, and because they don't really do anything with that blank canvas, it just feels a bit boring. Moving inside though, the interior of this theatre is stunning, and I'm not just talking about the auditorium. All of the guest spaces, you have two sides that have these gorgeous paintings of different Shakespeare shows. Don't quote me on this, but I do think one side is tragedies and the other side is comedies, though I could just be making that up. Up around the top, as you start getting onto the second floor, you also have these paintings that have been done to look like reliefs that depict notable shows that have happened throughout the history of the Drury Lane. There's also this gorgeous rotunda that has a bar in the middle of it, but I love the way the ceiling looks and the kind of like wraparound balcony that's up there as well. It also has statues of well-known British playwrights, including David Garrick and Shakespeare. The bathrooms are also great. Never has a West End theatre had more bathrooms than the Drury Lane. Don't quote me on that as if it's a fact, but it's what it feels like. The bathrooms here are really, really nice. And then moving inside the theatre, I think this is a gorgeous space. It looks so luxurious and really makes going to see a show here feel like a treat. A really fun fact about this theatre, as well as the auditorium, is the fact that the entire theatre is split in half. And that's because King George III and King George IV had a little bit of beef with one another about how they wanted to enjoy theatre productions. And as a result, King George III was like, I don't want to sit in a box with you. And so they split the entire theatre down the middle. So you've got the King's side and the Prince's side. Everything on the Prince's side has the Prince's seal, and the royal insignia is all over the King's side, including all of the seats. So it's split entirely down the middle, and I think that's hilarious. And so as a result of all this, this is going to go in F tier. I know I said I didn't love the outside, but I feel like my love for the inside and the fun details, such as it being split in half, really, really help elevate it above a lot of other West End venues. Next up is the Theatre Royal Haymarket. Now, unlike the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, the Theatre Royal Haymarket doesn't actually have a royal charter, so why it's pretending to have the royal in its name, I don't know, but we're going to carry on from there. The Theatre Royal Haymarket was actually the last West End theatre to continue using candlelight to light its shows when everyone made the transition to electricity, which I think is pretty interesting. And I think it's worth pointing out, exterior-wise, this looks very similar to the Lyceum in many ways. Again, it has those Corinthian columns. Column chat is still going strong, and I really like the gold on the top of these columns, as well as like those flower windows at the top. I think those are super fun and cute. Inside-wise is very like blues, greens, and then this warm wood. The wood isn't too dark. It feels just right, particularly when you offset it with the blues and the greens. It feels very nautical to me without feeling too cruise ship like, say, the Prince of Wales did. And so I'm gonna put this in A. I kind of wanted to make it F tier, but it's another one of those theatres that has a really drastically curved dress circle, and you know how I feel about those, so I'm going to dock it down to A. Up next is the Trafalgar Theatre, which was once upon a time named the Whitehall Theatre. The outside of this theatre I think is truly depressing. Have you ever seen a more depressing building? I've seen cheerier blocks of concrete at the side of the road, okay? I hate the outside of this theatre. The inside is a different story though. The interior of this theatre I can really vibe with. It's giving Dark Academia, Slytherin Common Room kind of vibes, and I'm here for it. Do the chairs look slightly like they belong on a London Underground train as opposed to in a theatre? Yes, but I think in this space, weirdly, it worked. But all in all, I think I'm going to have to put this in C. I really wanted to put it in B, but I think the outside is just too bad for me to do that, so it's going in C tier. We are down to our last three theatres, and starting us off in this last three is going to be the Vaudeville Theatre. This is another theatre that on the outside has that lovely glass marquee, which looks really lovely when lit up at night. The theatre is another one that kind of just gives me townhouse vibes, particularly when you strip away all of the Six the Musical marketing that's on the outside. The inside of this theatre is a very odd one to me. I don't remember it looking this bad when it was all mood lit and stuff like that, but it's very much giving me Roman villa, like recreation of a Roman villa. And I think it's because of how white the white is, and then also the red they chose, and then the gold detailing. I think a slightly warmer white maybe would have offset this recreation of a Roman villa feeling that it's giving me, but I'm going to place this in B tier. I think it's a pretty solid West End theatre as a general rule. The Victoria Palace Theatre is our second to last theatre that we need to rank today, guys, and it is currently home to Hamilton. Now, the exterior of this theatre is impressive, particularly because it holds its own against all of these big grand buildings that are around it. The stained glass entryway is gorgeous. I love the reds. I think it works really well with the golden Hamilton branding. All in all, I just really quite like it. The inside, as a general rule, is very opulent, but I do take issue with the green seats. I don't love the green seats. Weirdly, I do think the green seats make the gold ornamentation look like more opulent than it actually is. I don't think the green seats alone, though, are enough for me to rank this any lower than A tier. I do think this is a very solid theatre. It's a theatre I really like going to, and a theatre that I think is really gorgeously designed. And our final theatre is going to be the Wyndham's Theatre, which was named after the commissioner, Charles Wyndham. The outside of this theatre, again, is another very temple-looking theatre. I really like the tympanum/pediment that it has at the top there. It kind of looks like it could be a National Trust property if you were to plonk it in the middle of the countryside somewhere, which is kind of fun. I don't love the way they put the marquee outside this theatre, like with show posters and stuff on it. I think, again, it's slightly too understated for me and hard to photograph. But other other than that, I think the building is really, really great. The interior of this theatre, colour scheme wise, is really pretty. The colour palettes of soft blues and golds is so nice. Like the Novello Theatre, it has this really great art piece on the ceiling and a heavily decorated top of the proscenium arch, which is nice. The guest areas are a tad small, and by a tad small, I mean me stood in one of the stalls of the bathroom and my shoulders touch both sides of the walls, which was quite impressive. So they are small. I mean, it's a small theatre, so it's a little bit of a harsh gripe, I would say. But from my memory, the views from the dress circle were really nice. I really liked it. And all in all, it's a pretty solid theatre. So I think the final theatre of our video is going to go in tier A. All right, there you have it. That is my ranking of every West End theatre venue. I feel like some of these surprised even me. And I think comparing the theatres so closely together, when usually you're not seeing the insides of all of these theatres like back to back to back to back, like I was when ranking them, really led to some interesting results. I would love to know what you guys think. Maybe I ranked your favourite theatre really, really harshly. So let me know all about it in the comments. What do we agree on? What do we disagree on? If you did enjoy this video, remember to give it a likes up. And if it is more slightly unhinged or chaotic theatre content that you are after here on YouTube, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss another video. But that is all from me for now. So remember to stay stagey, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!